The patrons have spoken, and now we have Druddigon, a unique entry from Generation 5. It's got a great design. Its obvious Euro Dragon origins augmented with inspiration from the lizard species, the red-headed rock agama, as well as gargoyles, the latter being especially fitting given it is found in the Unova region's Dragon Spiral Tower. Additionally, we must shout out everyone who has ever used a Druddigon and had the very clever, very original thought to name it Judge Drud. I am the law, and so on. Anyway, today we're asking if this draconic cave dweller was able to serve justice in the competitive scene. And so, we ask, how good was Druddigon actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Druddigon's lower stats meant it wasn't going to be joining its Gen 5 Dragon Brethren in OU, but that was just fine. It actually dropped to RU, but it's going to be a while before we get to that, because despite not being a member of the tier proper via usage, Druddigon was actually an amazing UU Pokemon, regularly used and thought of highly by the best players. The first thing to note about Druddigon is its overflowing embarrassment of riches that is its move pool. It doesn't just have the vicious outrage characteristic of Gen 5 Dragon dominance along with the requisite fire, fighting, and ground coverage to melt the few steals that wouldn't collapse under the weight of outrageous sheer power. No, that's just the beginning. It's got the ultimate support move, Stealth Rock. It can phase and hit well without being blocked by Taunt with Stab Dragon Tail. It's got an incredible priority move in Sucker Punch, and if not with that, it can also make up for its painful speed through the paralysis spreading Glare, which is normal type and thus can't even be blocked by grounds. It could even provide trapping support with Pursuit. Throw in the likes of Taunt and you've got a Pokemon with nigh peerless versatility that goes perfectly with its well-rounded stats. In addition to its outstanding attack, made all the more outstanding by the dearth of steals to resist its high-powered outrage, it had solid bulk by lower tier standards, made genuinely impressive when invested and when considering its pure dragon typing's many useful resistances. Oh, and that's still not all. Druddigon had 3 abilities, each of which were genuinely terrific and enhanced its game even further. With Mold Breaker's ability ignoring effect, Druddigon's Choice Band Earthquakes could not be dodged by Levitate Pokemon, but what was particularly special about it was that it also had the absolutely amazing, incredibly rare trait of being a Stealth Rock Pokemon whose rocks would not get blocked and bounced back by Magic Bounce. Next, with Rough Skin, it provided an excellent punish for many annoying physical attacks, namely U-turn, especially when also holding a Rocky Helmet as it often did. This also made it superb at combating Rapid Spin, and thus offered another way for it to act as a tremendous Stealth Rocker, as if it wasn't great enough already with all the opportunities it got from its wonderful defensive profile. Finally, Sheer Force alongside Life Orb elevated the power of otherwise weak moves like Thunder Punch and the Flamethrower coming off of its far lower special attack stat, with Fire Blast mysteriously being the one thing seemingly kept out of its move pool, sufficiently to let Druddigon wield them as an actual threat. Druddigon could thus fill a multitude of roles to great success on many a team, as its numerous talents were widely appreciated, and so that's exactly what it did when it hit UU. It was particularly apt at punishing the tier's low steel usage with Choice Band outrages. Steals weren't nearly the automatic addition they were to OU teams, so there were plenty of teams that would have to select their death fodder when Druddigon hit the field. Plus, it's not like the tier steals were particularly safe either. Bronzong, Cobalion, and Empoleon all feared Earthquake. Remember, Bronzong's Levitate was rendered useless by Druddigon's Mold Breaker. Druddigon wasn't the only dragon in UU, but it was far, far stronger than Flygon and Kingdra. It actually made for quite an excellent Flygon partner, easily weakening the opposing team into a range where they could no longer withstand the still strong hits from its speedier comrade. Druddigon wasn't just about pounding Choice Band outrages though. It could run an excellent physically defensive utility set, punishing contact-heavy Pokemon like Victini, Darmanitan, and Snorlax with Rocky Helmet and Rough Skin, while easily setting up rocks, spreading paralysis, and shuffling the opposing team, or utterly ruining Volt Turn teams relying on Xatu to keep rocks off if running Mold Breaker. Adept at switching out the Rocky Helmet for leftovers is doing so, and often running heaps of special defense instead to take on monsters like Zapdos and Raikou. Finally, it could combine power and utility with a more aggressive Stealth Rocker that hit hard and tanked hits simultaneously, able to run pretty much any item it wanted to. Leftovers, Rocky Helmet, a Resist Berry, Custap Berry, Lum Berry, Dragon Gem was particularly useful for one-time Choice Band level power that could be used more flexibly. Druddigon was truly excellent in UU, but that's nothing compared to RU, where it was the absolute king of the tier, and where its versatility was just about endless. It did everything it did in UU and then some. The aforementioned sets hit harder and tanked better better against the lower power level, and it thus stretched the reach of what it could do with the moveset even further. Bulky sets were sometimes even running rest and sleep talk, usually a big no-no in Gen 5's awful sleep mechanics, but Druddigon was so good it pulled it off. You wanted to keep it healthy as much as you could, and not just rely on Alomamola's wish, though that certainly helped. It didn't even matter that 2 of its 3 sleep talks would almost always be useless, since it also ran Stealth Rock on this set, though it did potentially let the Rocky Helmet rough skin adorned Druddigon keep rocks up against rapid spinners even better, since it could pop them up again while asleep. All it needed was Dragon Tail as its attacking move. On the offensive side, Druddigon's offensive rocks and choice band sets also loved incorporating Pursuit, providing an excellent punish for a variety of top tier staples, most notably Slowking. Some players even used Dragon Gem, which could also be useful for giving a big boost to Sucker Punch if the matchup called for that instead. Druddigon also loved running mixed sets with Sheer Force Life Orb Flamethrower, which absolutely roasted the Tangrowth that thought they were safe against Druddigon's usually all physical assault, while also excelling against Durant and Steelix. Once again, it can't be overemphasized how Druddigon could really do whatever it wanted. Even if it sounded strange, like the aforementioned Dark Gem, it made everything work. Toxic on Choice Band sets to hinder Regenerator antics of Tangrowth and Alomomola, Thunder Punch on Choice Band or Sheer Force for Hazard Chip Mola, while also smacking Intimidate Quillfish without needing to lock into Outrage, Substitute on Sheer Force, to say nothing of the already endless permutations of the aforementioned sets. All in all, Druddigon had an absolutely incredible debut generation. Generation 6's addition of fairy types alongside power creep, mega and otherwise, which included a new dragon type face of Yu and Hydreigon, resulted in Druddigon dropping to Ryu. There it was a fine choice, though not quite performing to the level it had before. In addition to fairy types very much being a part of Ryu as well, Druddigon's hazard maintenance style of punishing rapid spin didn't quite work as well in the Age of the Fog, and a metagame that wound up going in the direction of slow balance teams with a preference for Pokemon more self-sustaining than Druddigon, especially with how often Toxic was thrown around in the rocks and defog war of attrition. This is not to knock Druddigon though, it was more specific now, yes, but his resist and bulk were still quite good and appreciated by many teams wielding them, not just for defense against an impressive range of offensive threats while grabbing rocks, but for paralysis spreading to benefit slower, hard-hitting teammates like Rhyperior, especially as Glare had been buffed to 100% accuracy from its previous 90%. Plus, Druddigon's anti-spin style still worked quite nicely against Blastoise, and it played well even Hitmonlee, both of which were on the faster-paced teams that Druddigon was best against. Druddigon's offenses were understandably more limited. With an Outrage it couldn't unleash nearly as freely anymore. The immensely popular Registeel stood in the way, as well as the fairy types Druddigon had to include Iron Tail or Gunk Shot in its moveset for. The moves hit hard thanks to the Sheer Force boost, so this wasn't a complete tragedy, but it became much harder to fit something like Thunder Punch for the eternally present Alomomola, or Sucker Punch to make it tough for something like Medicham to revenge kill. Still, though it demanded more care and precision this time around, Druddigon was a perfectly decent Pokemon in Gen 6 RU. Its previous tier was once again out of reach of Druddigon in Gen 7, as RU's power creep included, among many other things, the newfound Dragon-type presences of Zygarde 10%, as well as Tyrantrum and Noivern not getting banished to RU BL this time around. This wound up being just what Druddigon needed, though as it dropped to NU, where it was genuinely excellent once more, fitting in perfectly with the tier's lower power level, it was most valued for its excellent stealth rocking capabilities. It shrugged off hits from a great deal of tier with ease, including from the monster threat that was Magmortar, and thus cemented itself as one of the most consistent stealth rockers. Its Mold Breaker was amazing for completely and utterly ruining Xatu, which was as popular and dominant as it was difficult and obnoxious to get rocks up against, with many of the tier's go-to rockers like Steelix. This was as game-breaking as you could get. To so effortlessly pop up rocks against a team that was counting on Xatu to keep them off was a major advantage, not least because it made Xatu itself have to take rocks upon switching in, and thus make it less effective at blocking anything else. For example, Druddigon partnered beautifully with Ferroseed, because while Xatu without rocks in the field would normally stuff Ferroseed's threat of spikes effortlessly, it would now struggle greatly to do so. The difference in how a double switch would punish it now was night and day. Druddigon enabling such anti-Xatu tactics was excellent, since, to keep the Ferroseed example, if Xatu wasn't around, Ferroseed tended to thrive, and Druddigon enabled this much more easily than the riskier, more difficult route of having to try and pursuit trap Xatu first. Druddigon still had to be careful about going the distance if the opponent was to attempt a protracted defog war, but it was nothing that couldn't be handled. In addition to massive wishes from its common supporting teammate Vaporeon, Druddigon also enjoyed sliding Protect into its moveset, letting it drag as much recovery out of its leftovers as possible, and making it quite self-sufficient in this regard. attack. It was also a great help in making Druddigon even more frustratingly immovable for the tier's offensive Pokemon. Not only did it check its usual targets with resisted stabs better, it also became much more difficult for other generally strong Pokemon like Aerodactyl to take out. Scouting what potentially threatened choice Pokemon like Passimian were going to do was also a major contributor in this regard. Of course, Druddigon wasn't just a protect machine, it was also a fantastic toxic spreader, which it actually used more than the protect that went so well with it, as toxic let it ensure some sort of meaningful progress on a great deal of the tier. With paralysis nerfed to half speed instead of quartering it, as it has previously, it ran glare less, but it was still a great option of course. Druddigon's defensive utility was so great, it usually didn't want to give that up, but if it did do so, it was for the great reward of its old school style offensive rocker, with the twist being that, now that it was packing Dragonium Z as its item, its one-time burst option was stronger and didn't lock it in anymore. It was an excellent way to push the game forward for more faster-paced teams than the ones Druddigon usually found itself on, as its teammates would more readily capitalize on the hole its devastating Drake had ripped in an unsuspecting opposing Blastoise. And even if the opponent did think something might be up, the move was so strong that the opponent had to tread carefully around the mere threat of it, lest Druddigon drill something completely for free. Overall, Gen 7 was a fantastic return to form for Druddigon. Druddigon's Generation 8 saw it begin as a solid stealth rocker in the Isle of Armor RU tier. Its usual defensive reliability led it to consistently chipping serious damage and progress on the opponent via Stealth Rock, Dragon Tail, Glare, and the Rough Skin Rocky Helmet combination, which let it play offense while going on defense, switching in against several dangerous threats like Barraskewda, Virizion, and Toxicroak. It wasn't particularly flashy, more of the same old Druddigon. Its Glare wound up being more crucial than ever because heavy-duty boots meant Stealth Rock wasn't quite what it had been before. Though it certainly forced plenty of chip on plenty of Pokemon, it just meant Druddigon had to be more specific with picking its spots and with being included on a team. Still, it was a fine Pokemon. Far more interesting though was Druddigon's first ever serious use in OU. On one of an incredibly cheesy setup spam team, Druddigon was chosen as the Stealth Rock leadoff because it had Mold Breaker Stealth Rock to set up in the face of Magic Bounce Hatterene, but unlike Excadrill, which could do the same, Druddigon had Taunt, with which it crucially prevented Defox from the Corviknight that would dominate Excadrill. Druddigon also used Glare, whose paralysis helped buy turns for one of the cheesiest setup sweepers to ever grace OU. Nasty Plot Galarian Slowbro with the ability Quick Draw, holding a Quick Claw, giving it a 44% chance to go first. Flanking this paragon of purely concentrated skill were other such virtuosos of deep strategy and forward thinking like Shell Smash Cloyster and Quiver Dance Volcarona. Druddigon's specific blend of talents meant it was uniquely suited to lead off against the metagame at large and support these auto-win attempts. After the Crown Tundra release, Druddigon dropped to its lowest tier yet, PU, where it proceeded to do its usual defensive Dragon Knack, Rocks, Glare, punishing contact moves, the works. However, strangely enough, it actually wound up struggling the most it had, perhaps ever, with all the passive damage floating around between Gigalith's constant sand and a barrage of toxics around every corner. Druddigon had to walk on eggshells to not get worn down, and by doing so, didn't wind up contributing very much in many meta landscapes, defining battles revolving around drawn-out passive damage wars, very much antithetical to Druddigon's playstyle, which was, as phrased by one top-tier player, here for a good time, not a long time. Poor matchup into the incredibly popular aromatherapy Rabombi wasn't great for it either. It was still viable for sure, but quite a specific choice. At the same time, Druddigon was also a decent pick in NU, where its defensive value was nice for taking on a range of popular picks, so Volley Ground, Copperajah, Aerodactyl, Passimian, and even Rotom-Mow, chip damage, rocks, and so forth. However, the same problem arose. Druddigon couldn't heal itself, and its bulk, while great, wasn't the monolithic immovability it needed to be to compensate for that total lack of longevity, a major flaw in Gen 8 tiers whose default state of play tends to be a drawn-out battle. Still, it was fine, but a step down from its previous peaks to be sure. And that's it. So how good was Druddigon actually? Well, its debut generation was phenomenal. In both Gen 5 UU and RU, it had an incredible mix of power, support, bulk, and above all, versatility. It did so much, from ripping Choice Band outrages to setting up Stealth Rock and spreading Glare paralysis to about a million variants in between. It slowed down in Gen 6's Fairy type heavy RU, but it had a terrific return to form in Gen 7 NU, where its Mold Breaker Stealth Rock surpassing Zatu's oppressive Magic Bounce made it a particularly important force. In Generation 8, it had its ups and downs, downs. It started off solid in RU and even had a role on a dangerously effective cheese team in OU, making its first real appearance in the tier. But when the Crown Tundra rolled in, it dropped all the way down to PU, where it had its usual niche, but wasn't as impactful as it had been before. The best part was that it performed very similarly in NU at the same time. Still though, if that's as bad as it gets, that's pretty good, and Druddigon's high points have been stellar. Overall, Druddigon has had quite the solid competitive history. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos and voting for this Pokemon for this month's patron pick. And if you're interested from some exclusive benefits from our Patreon, feel free to check out the link in the description below. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Gustavo, Hal, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Pretzel SP, Raven Daytona Ring, Ray Ray, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, and Stoneface Colin for their major support of our videos. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Druddigon? How would you buff it? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.